You've mentioned threshing several times as
Hmm.
well. Can you tell me about threshing time?
That was a big deal. All the neighbors had to work together. There were no combines. There was one farmer had a combine, but the reason they didn't uh, give up on the threshing is because the straw piles, the cattle would winter at those straw piles. They were very valuable to them. And when all the men, able-bodied men in the neighborhood left, then as young as 12 years old, we would haul bundles and help with the threshing and be a big part of it. My friend and I, he was a year older, I was 12, he was 13, we had one team together until the next year, and then we each had our own team. It was hard work, early in the morning, but it was fun. We enjoyed it. It was a good time too.
What were some of the other like field work things that you had to do?
Well, the kind of threshing we did was bundles, shocking. So you had to cut that with a grain binder and then shock them, set them up on end, heads up in the air, and the haying was all done by hand in those days. Another thing you couldn't buy is machinery, farm machinery. It just wasn't available. So you had to patch up everything that whatever you had, just keep it going. And if you tried to improve something, wanted to improve something, it just weren't able to do it until after the war. Then after the war, there was such a scarcity of machinery that a lot of the dealers, they would have a tractor sitting there for a certain price, but you couldn't buy it for that. You had to pay money under the table, and the person that offered the most money under the table got the tractor. Of course, that was illegal, but it was done. It was done with cars as well. Black market, they called it.
Right. What were some of your chores growing up?
Had to do with animals, everything with animals, feeding, taking care of them, uh, cleaning barns, the hay, put up the feed and all that. And then when we were younger, uh, I suppose around 6 or 7 years old, the drought must have been at the height of its severity. We'd have to take these milk cows out and graze ditches and things like that. So we would get together uh, at the schoolhouse corner. There were 3 herds, but we could keep them apart, kept them apart, and then we would play, and the cows would once in a while get into the grain. We didn't watch them close enough, and we'd get in a little trouble for that, but those were good times. We enjoyed that. I enjoyed that. My mother made homemade wine, cherry wine, choke cherry wine, and when we'd go out with these cows, we'd have our bottles of water, and some kids brought Kool-Aid, and we had our lunch, and this one kid gave me a taste of his Kool-Aid, and that was kind of a treat in those days. That was really good. So the next day I filled my little bottle with wine, homemade wine. Not much, but I had some in there. I said, here, it's Kool-Aid, try this. And he did. Didn't know what it was. Boy, that's good Kool-Aid, he said. That only happened once.
Do you remember how she made the choke cherry wine?
I don't remember all the steps she went through, but first, of course, you had to pick the cherries, and that was a lot of work, and then wash them and clean them, and what the procedure was after that, I don't know. My wife and I never made it, but she made wine.
Did you ever have to help with anything inside the house?
No. When I came along, my dad had 2 girls to do housework, so I started outside right away. That's where he needed me. I did very little. To this day, I don't know much about cooking and things like that.
Right. Were there any chores that you particularly liked doing?
Well, anything with animals, I enjoyed that. The milking in those days was done by hand, and I didn't really care for that, but I didn't mind it that much, but it was not too much pleasure in that. But everything else I seem to like.
You've mentioned a lot of different kinds of animals on the farm. And you mentioned that you treated a lamb like a pet. Did you have any other pets?
Yeah, Shetland pony, dog, things like that. But I guess this sheep was the most challenging.
Did the sheep have a name?
No, he was just sheep. He could knock me off my feet if I was a little too slow.
Did your family keep a lot of horses?
Yes, because before we got the tractor, before we bought the tractor, it took 6 horses to plow. And I remember this too. One of his horses got sick one spring during planting time, and he had a 2-year-old. But a 2-year-old, you can't work all day. They weren't matured enough. So the neighbors had a 2-year-old too that they didn't need. So he was able to get that 2-year-old, and he worked one half a day and worked the other one half a day. And it was hard to believe how important a horse was in those days. It could just disrupt your whole farming if you lost one.
Did you go horseback riding very often?
Oh, every day. Spent a lot of time on horseback. My confirmation year, I rode 10 miles one way, 10 miles in the morning, 10 miles back for 6 weeks. Did a lot, and we trailed cattle into town and things like that. And yeah, I grew up on a horse.
All right. Were there differences when you were growing up between summer chores and winter chores?
Oh, definitely. In the winter, things slowed down to you'd feed your cattle and clean the barns, and that was pretty well it. Whereas in the summer, you'd do the chores, and then you'd go and do the farm work, like out in the fields. You'd do that all day, and then you'd come home, and then you'd still have your daily chores to do, like milking cows and feeding pigs and all that. In the winter, things slow down, and there's less to do.
Can you describe a typical winter for us?
The typical winters at that time were very hard. We had a lot of snow. Even in the 30s, when it was so dry, it didn't rain in the summer. We seemed to have a lot of snow in the winter, and it was cold. They were hard winters. At least I thought so at that age. And the roads were bad. And well, there was one time my mother didn't get off the farm for 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, she was running short of some items of food. Now, today we can go to the store every day. This was 3 months, and she had to go to the store, but the roads were blocked. So, and by that time I was about 16 or 17 years old. I took a saddle horse, and it took me all day to get to town. And then I found a place to keep the horse, and then the next morning, the mail carrier got hold of me, and he hadn't been able to deliver mail for days or weeks probably. So he had a grain sack full of mail for me for the neighborhood. He asked if I'd deliver that. And I had 50 pounds of flour on the back and another grain sack full of groceries on the other side. So I walked all the way home. It was too much for the horse. I used to for just a pack horse. And it was cold. I don't think it was a bitter cold day. I froze my face, and there were little farms along the way, and I tell myself, well, I'm going to go to that farm, and then I'm going to stop in and warm up. When I'd get to that one, I'd say, no, I'll go to the next one. Went all the way home, never did stop and warm up. But I paid for it. I had frostbite, terrible. So then the next day I went and delivered the mail. And here were these people that hadn't gotten mail for weeks, and all of a sudden you bring them a bundle of mail. And it's amazing how important that was. At that one time they brought the mail out by airplane. They'd drop it in the yards. Little Piper Cub.
kinds of things would you get in the mail when you were growing up?
The Look magazine. We didn't get a daily paper, we got a weekly paper. Once in a while, my mother would order something by mail, and of course, it took weeks and probably months to get there, but things like that. Letters from relatives living far off or something like that. Soldiers, we got a lot of mail from soldiers, and my sister wrote to them regularly. My mother did too. I wrote to some. We got the letters where part of it would be censored, blacked out. Often wondered what was underneath there, but we couldn't read it.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about what a typical spring was like?
Spring was a busy time of the year. Cows were calving. Heifers had to be broke in to milk, things like that. And then you'd have to be getting your grain cleaned. Seed was cleaned on the farm in those days. And electricity didn't come to our farm until 48, so the time I'm talking about, my dad, I'd go to school and he'd be cleaning wheat, and he'd be turning that fanning mill and whistling, and when it was empty, he'd fill it again and turn some more. And I'd come home in the afternoon, he'd still be doing that, so that was a long day, just cranking a fanning mill. It was a busy time of the year, but it was good, it was exciting, things were looking up.
Right. How about summer?
Well, summer was busy in a different way. Again, you had to put up all the hay for the next winter, and the crop had to be taken off, and like I said before, bundles shocked and stuff like that. So it was all there was a lot of work to do, plenty of work, but we didn't know any different.
And how about fall? What was fall like?
Fall was after the threshing had been done. Then things slowed down, and then they had to haul the coal in for the winter, and there were little mines all over, not too far, within horse and wagon distance. And then the coal had to be hauled in for the winter, and corn picked and stuff like that. And but things were winding down, and it's more a relaxed time of the year.
Which of those seasons was your favorite?
Fall.
Fall?
Fall, definitely. Hunting. We hunted. I don't think we had any game wardens. If we did, I never knew about one. So we'd hunt pheasants, my friend and I. And no matter how many we brought home, my mother always fixed them all. Nothing was ever wasted. But there were so many pheasants, and there were no hunters because, like I had said, able-bodied men were all gone, and the other thing was we couldn't get shells. We had a hard time getting shells, so you never wasted one if you could possibly help it. Same thing in the winter hunting rabbits. 22 shells were almost impossible to get. So when we'd get a box, we'd have to make it work. 10 cents a rabbit, after all.
All right. You mentioned hunting when you were younger. Did you ever go fishing?
No. We lived too far away from any water that was fishable. I guess the Missouri River, that's before the dam, before the lake. We didn't get up there very much. Fishing was just something we didn't do.
All right. How about trapping?
Got in on a little of that, but not very much. I watched the older boys set traps and stuff like that, but I never really did on my own. They trapped skunks, and I never really didn't like that. They'd take them home and skin them, and oh, the stink was awful, and I didn't like that. Never got into that.
All right. other sorts of things did you do for entertainment when you were growing up?
I think I've covered just about all of them. Hunting, horses, animals, that type of thing. That was the entertainment. And then we'd get together as kids and play games and stuff like that. But like I said, I grew up basically alone, so it was kind of limited what I could do. But I didn't mind that. It was all right.
Okay. Can you describe for me the house that you grew up in?
Yeah, it was very modest farmhouse, no insulation, the windows leaked air, cold, no basement under it, the floor was cold. The only thing that kept it warm, we had a good supply of coal, and them heaters would just work overtime. And we were warm, but it took quite an effort to keep it warm. And we had a well in the house. We had a little cistern pump. But it wasn't a cistern, it was a well, so we were fortunate in that. We didn't have to carry the water for the house, other than the wash water. The water in the house was hard, so a quarter-mile away was a spring. And every Sunday afternoon, we'd take the barrel and a horse and a stone boat and go over there and dip the water out of the spring and bring it up and put it in 2 wash boilers that were set on the coal range. And they were heated up overnight. And then the next morning, my mother, before we were even up, sometimes it was still pitch dark, she'd be washing clothes already, and we'd hear the old Bricks and Stratton engine running.
Did your mother make her own soap?
Oh yes, oh definitely. And the only thing worse than making soap in the house, that was the powerful smell, that lye, was horseradish. That was worse. That would bring tears to your eyes. It was good once it was done, but it's quite something making it.
Do you remember how she made it?
I remember they ground it up. I never helped, but they had to grind it up, and that was the hard part. That's when all these gases evidently let go, and they did most of that outside because it was so powerful.
Were there 2 levels to your house?
Yes, I had. Even though the house was not very high, and the inside of my bedroom was sloped, it was mine, and I enjoyed it. That was my sanctuary, and I had privacy there.
Right. How did your family try to keep the house cool in the summer?
Natural cooling, open windows, that's all there was to do in those days.
Can you tell me about taking baths when you were growing up?
Once a week. And for a time, I had a barrel sitting up beside the outside well, and the sun would heat up the water, and I'd take a dip in that. And my parents never used it, but I did. And other than that, it was the old bathtub, and once a week, whether you needed it or not. Even at threshing time. Itchy all day long, working around dust and stuff. You'd come home and you'd wash from till to here and till to here, and take a washcloth and sponge bathe the rest, and that was it. Now oh my goodness, we'd take baths twice a day if we have to. That was just not possible.
All right. How often did you brush your teeth when you were growing up?
Oh, once a day, I guess. And that we learned in school, mostly, and not home so much. I don't know if my dad, he didn't brush his teeth very often, but he still had his teeth when he died.
did you visit a dentist?
Not very often, only when necessary. And my dad would say if I had a bad tooth, how much to fill it? $4. How much to pull it? $1. Pull it. So I lost some permanent teeth that way. The first ones. Not many, I've still got most of them. That wasn't too important.
Did you ever visit an optometrist when you were growing up?
I did. I had some vision problems, and I did visit an optometrist.
How about going to the doctor?
That didn't happen very often. I had appendix attack in school. I got sick, started throwing up, and the teacher told me to go home. So I walked home, and on the way home, I'd go down to my knees when it would hit, and then I'd have to lay there until it got better, and then I finally got home. And of course, I was the third one in our family. My sisters both had appendix operations, so they recognized what it was. But where my sisters had to go to Bismarck, there was no hospital here. By the time I had mine, there was the Hillcrest Hospital in Beulah. And that was just a hotel. They moved in from Halliday and made a hospital out of it. And the doctor was scrubbing up in the same bathroom that I was using after I'd had my enema for the surgery. And he was scrubbing up right alongside of me. Those were the accommodations. And it was just bare bones, but it was a hospital, and everything went well. But other than that, we didn't see a doctor very often. We did get our shots. That was a big thing. And we'd all have to come to town, and they'd probably have it in the theater or in the gym someplace. All these bawling kids, and we'd be in there. It was scared half to death. And when you finally got your turn to get the shot, it wasn't as bad as you had imagined up until you got there.
You mentioned that you broke your leg when you were younger. Did you see a doctor for that?
Not right away. They took me to a midwife, that same one that had delivered me apparently, and she said it wasn't broken, it was just badly bruised. But then later on, it was starting to get crooked, and then they had to splint it. I missed a whole year of school because of it.
What happened that you broke it?
We were, like I said, we'd get this wash water with a horse and a barrel and a stone boat. And she was a very gentle horse, and I was leading her. And the barrel, the snow was uneven. And the barrel fell off the stone boat and come rolling alongside, and she jumped to the side and knocked me over and broke my leg. And I was maybe I think it was about 6 or 7 years old.
Right. Did your parents have home remedies for illnesses?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it would include Albengreider, which was a German, and I don't know even how to spell that. It was a German remedy that had German lettering on the side of the bottle, and green drops and liniment and things like that. Some worked, some didn't.
All right. Going back to your house a little bit, did your mother have a large garden where you grew up?
Yes, always. Right behind the house. And we had to haul water for that in the summer when it got real dry. Again, with the barrel, the stone boat, and the horse. Then you'd have to carry it and water the plants, and without that they wouldn't have grown. When it was so terrible dry there those years, no garden would have made it.
What things did she grow in the garden?
Watermelon. I would raid the watermelon patch, and I'd come in, and she'd accuse me of being in watermelon. I never knew how she knew. And then I realized I would break them open on my knee, and I'd come in with a wet spot on my knee, and then she knew that I was after her watermelons. But she had all the normal things like cucumbers and peppers and tomatoes and things like that. Big potato patch.
Did she can a lot of these?
Yes, yes. Besides sausage and meat and chicken and things like that, that was their means of preserving food, was canning there. That was the number one means.
Did you ever have to help her with canning?
No, I didn't. Like I said, my older sisters helped her with that.
Right. Who usually prepared the meals in your family?
She did.
And where would she store food to keep it cool? In the refrigerator?
No, we had a kerosene refrigerator, yes. Before that, I don't remember how she did it.
All right. Do you remember any of the traditional German foods that your mother made?
Other than the dough dishes, of course, she made all those dough dishes. And they were traditional German, strudel, Näpfle, and all that. Yeah, she made all of that.
All right.
Besides the Fleischkichle and Krautbierroche, and I can't remember all of them, but all those.
Right. Well then, when you were growing up, what kinds of clothing were common?
Jeans, overalls, the bib overalls. Shoes were limited supply again because of the war. And I had shoes with holes in them, and we'd stick cardboard in there and walk on the cardboard. We'd usually have one good pair, and then the others weren't so good. Probably some type of suit. I don't know. Just don't remember. For church and things like that, some kind of fancier dress.
Were most of your clothes homemade, or were they
No,
purchased?
no, none of them.
Did anybody in your family do any sewing?
She did. My mother did a lot of sewing, but not for me, for the girls more than herself.
Did your mother quilt or embroider?
She embroidered, she crocheted by the hour. The girls, my sisters and my wife still have things that she made. She did that by the hour. In the wintertime, she'd listen to her radio and she'd be crocheting. That was her entertainment.
Did you always have a radio when you were growing up?
Pretty much. Again, she saw to it. We had one of the earlier radios in the neighborhood, and in 1936, this is history, there was a big boxing match. Joe Louis was an American, African American, and Max Schmeling, who was a German. And of course, then already there was some conflict between the Germans and the Americans, and this big boxing match took place. And I was probably 5 years old or something like that. I didn't care too much about the boxing match, but all of a sudden our yard filled up with cars. And here are these people that came to listen to that radio and to get that boxing match. And as the kids, the neighborhood kids came along, we were playing outside, and I happened to go in the house. And the radios weren't too reliable in those days. They would fade in, and they would come, and they would go. Well, here this boxing match was just at its most interesting part, and it faded out. And what I saw was my dad had his ear next to the radio, and he was given a blow-by-blow account in German to the others in the room, and I'd give $100 if I could have that blow-by-blow account, how he described what was going on. and it was a battery-powered radio. And of course, I was played very sparingly because the batteries would need to be replaced. And
What other radio programs would you listen to?
when I came home from school, Jack Armstrong, Lone Ranger, there was another one, I don't remember what it was, The Shadow and things like that. Those were my programs. They'd be on 15 minutes at a time. And I had about half an hour, 45 minutes of those. I'd hurry home from school to listen to those. And she had her soap operas, believe it or not, they had them then already. Judy and Jane, Ma Perkins, I don't know, can't remember the rest. She'd follow them every day. And then they'd listen to the news and things like that. And then it was turned off.
Right. You mentioned that you got electricity in 1948.
It came into the area in 1948, yes. It was made available to the farmers. Our farm didn't get it in 48. It was later.
Do you remember when you got electricity?
53.
And how did that change your life?
Oh, it changed it dramatically. I came home the first night and the yard light was on. It was dark already when I came home. And I just, up to then it was a lantern. You'd carry a lantern with you wherever you went. And that was amazing. But my wife had the experience. She and my sister, their farm had electricity about 2 years before ours did. They came home together, and my wife went in to find the matches to light the kerosene lamp, and my sister went over and flicked the light switch, and there was light. And she didn't know that they had wired it up that day, and she was just dumbfounded how everything was lit up, the electricity. Of course, that meant electric washing machines, and it just opened up a whole new field.
When you were growing up, did your family always have a telephone?
No, never. They did before I came along. Way in the earlier years, they had a farm-owned telephone line, but that was defunct by the time I can remember. We never had one until the RTAs came around later on here.
And when was that?
Near as I remember, in the mid-50s, they started building their lines.
All right. Then we'll move on a little bit. I'm going to ask you some questions about church when you were growing up. So how important was religion to your family?
Apparently very important because we went regularly, but our church only had church every other week. There were 2 churches in that parish, and one Sunday they had church in one, and one Sunday they had it in the next, and the same pastor. But we very seldom missed. If the roads were blocked, we went by horse, sled.
How far away was the church?
The one church was 10 miles away, the other one was 5 miles away. And with confirmation, they alternated between the two. And of course, the year I was confirmed, it was at the far one. So I had to ride 10 miles, 20 miles a day.
What denomination were you raised?
Lutheran, American Lutheran. German, of course.
Can you tell us about the seating arrangements in your church?
The men on one side, women on the other, girls on the side with the women, boys, we had to sit way up front. Hated it, but that's where we had to sit. One day my cousin was acting up. We were sitting side by side, and I knew better. I was a little older than he was acting up. And next thing, here come my uncle, and he had a songbook, and he hit it on his son's head. And that little guy never even looked around to see who it was. He knew who it was. He just slid down. But discipline was immediate.
Great. Can you tell me about any of the religious activities you took part in when you were growing up?
Other than Sunday school, we had our summer Bible school and things like that, and well, that was about it. And then regular church service.
Can you tell us about summer Bible school?
Oh yeah, that was interesting. I was the youngest in my family, and my cousin was the youngest in her family, so their way of getting us to Sunday school, we had a two-wheel cart and a pony, and we would ride together. And we were just very, very young. And from the time we left the house in the morning, and then one day we'd go to my house, one day we'd go to her house. That's how we alternated. They wouldn't know what happened to us until they saw us walking in the door again 2 days later. And nobody ever worried about it. And one time we got caught in a storm. Our church was way up on 1806 north of Beulah. It's up quite high, and there was a storm coming across the reservation. You could see it coming from a long ways off. And it looked dark, it looked bad. So the pastor said, everybody go home. Well, the rest of them lived right close around the church, pretty close, but we had quite a ways to go. So we harnessed our pony, and we got going about 2 miles, and oh, it was thundering and lightning strikes and pouring. It didn't hail. And going through one of the dips, there were two poles that came up alongside this pony, and one of them broke off, and he spun around, and he was facing us. So there we were, we broke down. So I finally, and the pony was just all upset, excited because of the thunder. And I finally got him away from the other pole that wasn't broke off, got him unhooked from that. And then my cousin held him, and I got on him, and then she was able to get on behind him, and we rode the rest of the way. But the mistake I made, I should have pulled the harness off of him, because we both got sore legs from the harness rubbing. We didn't have a saddle on. And we got home, we got up to the valley where I lived, and the whole valley was underwater. The wheat was washed down, and the water was going over the road. And we got up to my place, and it was 2 o'clock, and we put the pony away, and we were just glad to be alive. And we walked in the door, and my mother said, "What are you guys doing home so early?" But that's how it was. They weren't worried. We had just come through all this bad experience, and nowadays you'd have to call on the cell phones. Hey, it's raining out here, it's stormy.
All right. You've mentioned having to go to confirmation classes. Can you tell
Yes.
us about those?
Yes. We had a pastor before I reached the age of confirmation, who was a strict old German disciplinarian, and we didn't like him. He was mean. He beat the kids. Well, then we got this kindly old pastor, and we just loved him. And we learned way more from him than we ever did from the one who tried to beat it into us. And it was just interesting. I enjoyed it. By the time we got to confirmation school, we had to do a lot of memorizing. Catechism and all that had to be memorized. But I had already memorized that, so I kind of breezed through it. But we had a pastor at that time in 43 who was very interested in prophecy, what was to come. Now, this was in World War II. People were very concerned what was going to happen next. And I still remember what he taught us, and he didn't have it all right at the time. He couldn't see some of the things coming, but he put the interest in. I, for one, picked it up. I don't know how many of the others did, and I'm still interested in that subject. For instance, Israel was not a nation at that time. You study the history books at that time, there was no country by the name of Israel. And then in 48, it became a nation. And that's one of the things that's prophesied in the Bible. So that was very interesting to me.
When you were confirmed, was there a big ceremony in your church?
There was a ceremony, yes, we all had to sit up front, and then they quizzed us. There were supposed to be certain things we had to know, and of course, after that, we were members of the church too. And I knew them.
Right. Did you have a celebration when you got home?
No. It's pretty much life as usual. Milked the cows, did the chores.
Were you able to question religious teachings?
I did. It didn't go over very well. But I did question some things.
Did your parents restrict anything because of religion?
No, not really.
Right. How did your family view people of other faiths?
I guess they were quite tolerant. Mostly everybody was Lutheran in that area. There were, I think, 2 Catholic families, but I don't think there was ever any intolerance among them. The only other family was Church of God, and they all mingled and worked together.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about church and religion when you were growing up?
Well, it was a very important part of our lives, of their lives, our parents' lives, apparently. And some of the things that both my sister and I remember is going to church when the weather was so bad. We had to take a team of horses, and my mother would heat rocks and in the oven and put them in the bottom. And I guess what I'm getting at is look what they went through to get to church. So it must have been important to them. And that's a fact of life. The harder, the more difficult your life is, the closer you come to God. The better it is, the further away we get. That's just human nature.
Right. When you were growing up, which was your favorite holiday?
Oh, I would say Christmas. Had to have been.
Can you tell us about Christmas at your house?
It was very simple. We got maybe 1 gift a year. That was it. And, the nuts and things that we didn't have normally throughout the year, and the candy were quite abundant then. To the girls, I guess probably they got a new dress, and that was important to me. Clothes weren't all that important, but it was just a festive time.
Did your family have a Christmas tree?
Oh, yes. Not always a very big one, though, I guess I must say.
How did you decorate it?
Live candles. And I remember the candle holders would clip on. You'd put a candle in there. And even in church, big Christmas tree. And think of the fire hazard. All this live flames and the Christmas tree and a church full of people. Never saw one burst into flame. Church didn't have electricity either.
Did you believe in Santa Claus?
No. The Santa Claus we had at school were such fakes that there's no way you could believe in them. We'd recognize their voice or one thing or another. No.
Right. Do you remember any of the gifts you received?
Yeah, one especially, a BB gun. And I was so happy I went hunting right away with it. Sparrows, but I had to use it right away. It's cold, bitter cold day, but I was out there. I don't think I hurt any of them, but I shot at them.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about Christmas?
And then we'd go get to church. They had the bags, of course, of goodies, and that was always a big treat. There would be things in there we didn't get much of during the year. It was good.
All right. Did your family celebrate Easter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We dyed eggs. My mother would buy colored chickens. In those days, you could buy the dyed chickens, and she'd always have a few of those. Red chickens, yellow chickens, green ones. They were fun.
How did you dye the eggs?
The old-fashioned way. They had little pills of color, apparently, and you'd put them in hot water and dissolve them and then dip your eggs in there and try to make different designs on them and stuff like that. Just, I don't think that's changed much in 50, 60 years.
Did you believe in the Easter Bunny?
No.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about Easter?
No. I don't remember too much about. It was a good day. Anything out of the ordinary was good.
Did your family celebrate the 4th of July?
Yes, not always. One year we had to build new fence, and all the cars were going by us going to the rodeo, and we were out there pounding fence posts. I remember that one the best. And then another year we were getting ready to go, and the big flood took place in 1938, and houses floated off their foundations. Beulah Main Street was flooded, and so we didn't make it in that time either. But I remember some of the rodeos. Just up the end of the valley from us was the reservation at that time before the dam came in, and the Indians put on a rodeo like none I've ever seen before. They had bucking chutes, but they didn't have an arena. So they told all the white people to park their cars in a circle around the bucking chutes. That was supposed to be the arena. Well, one of the Bronx, they turned out, jumped over the hood of a car and dragged his legs across and crushed the hood down. And so the white people all backed their cars way out of the way, and then it was an open-air rodeo. They'd buck those horses out until they were out of saddles, and then there was a brief intermission, maybe an hour long, until they'd round up all those horses and get the saddles back, and then we'd go on with Act Two. It was different. They were good. It's not at all like the professional rodeos nowadays.
Did you ever have firecrackers on the farm?
Yeah, we had firecrackers. I remember especially my dog hated them. We'd start playing with firecrackers. He'd go hide, and you didn't see him again till we quit.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about the 4th of July?
No, basically that's it. There was a carnival at times. I remember attending that when we were quite small, and rodeos seemed to be the big thing. My parents would go as far as Killdeer to go to the rodeo up there. Apparently that's what they liked.
Right. Did your family celebrate any other holidays like Thanksgiving?
Mm-hmm. Thanksgiving was, yeah, it's a traditional type, I guess I would say. Although I don't think she raised turkeys, but we very seldom ate one. She would have a duck or something like that. And I think mainly it's because the turkeys were too big, because there was just the few of us.
Right. How about New Year's?
When I was small, they had a practice where, I don't know how to say it in English, but they would come around, Najoranschießen, they called it in German, And some young men would come around and they would go up to the window, knock on the window where the head of the house was sleeping, and then he would knock, let him know that that was it, and then they would recite a verse and shoot a shotgun. And somehow that had a significance. I never really knew what it was. The only thing I remember is I would never hear the verse. I would never hear anything else. But I'd be scared half to death when that shotgun went off in the middle of the night. And then I knew it was New Year's.
All right. Did your family celebrate Valentine's Day or Halloween?
We did in school, but not at home. Parents weren't into that.
How about birthdays?
Sometimes my birthday would go by and I didn't even know it. One year we were threshing and it was my birthday and I had completely forgotten it. My family didn't remember apparently. And the lady where we were threshing at, she remembered. And I sat down at the table to eat and she put this cake in front of me and I was just so surprised. And it was a birthday cake. That's the one I remember. But no, it was not a big celebration, not a big thing. Not like it is with my wife. She never forgets any birthdays. They never slip by without being honored in some way.
All right. Is there anything else you remember about holidays or celebrations when you were growing up?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay. Then can you tell me about some of the pastimes you took part in when you were a teenager?
Many and varied. Some were good, some weren't. The thing at that time was after you were confirmed and you were pretty well safe to do anything you wanted. My parents very seldom questioned where I was at, and so therefore we would go places where we shouldn't have. Did things we shouldn't have. Never really got in trouble with the law. Probably should have a few times. But it was a great time.
Did you ever go to movies?
Oh yeah, we went to movies. Yes.
What were some of your favorites?
My Friend Flicka. That was our all-time favorite. And then the Abbott and Costello movies and some of those, the comedy, Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, road shows, road movies, those were good.
Did you ever go to dances?
After, I was a teenager, on my own, yes. Mm-hmm.
Were they barn dances or wedding dances?
Some mostly barn dances. We had, there was a dance hall in Beulah called the Sheep Shed, and the reason for that was because it looked identically like a sheep shed. And we roller skated in there on Sunday night. There were dances on Saturday night, and it was packed all the time. Zap Hall, dances, roller skating, that was big activity, and movies.
Right. How old were you when you started dating?
Too young.
Can you describe a typical date?
Well, at first it was just a bunch of us would pile in a car and maybe 3 couples, 2 couples, whatever it was, and we'd go do things that way. Of course, that narrows down then with time, and it changes a little.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your youth activities or dating when you were growing up?
It was fun. We had a good time. We didn't have much money, and sometimes we'd chip together and buy 5 gallons of gas, which cost us $1. put it in the car so we could drive around some more. And it didn't take a whole lot of money at that time to have a good time. And we celebrated our 59th anniversary yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How did you meet your wife?
In Zap. She had been, my good friend was dating her sister. And my wife had been gone. She was South Dakota, I believe. And she came back unbeknownst to any of us. And of course, we had no phone calls. He couldn't call ahead and say, "Are you ready?" Or his girl couldn't tell him that my sister's here. So when we got here was this very good-looking girl. And her sister said, "I want you to be with her tonight." She told me, because I knew her before, the sister. And I looked at this girl and I thought, I can handle that. This is nice. And we hit it off pretty good.
How long did you date before you were married?
I think it was 1.5 years.
Can you tell us about your wedding?
Very simple. And all the people that were our wedding are dead now. Because it was just my parents and our attendants and the pastor and his wife, and that was it. At the church in Zap. Pastor Dagey. And Pastor Dagey was a displaced person this was after the war. Displaced persons came over, he came from Latvia. And his English was such that when he read the vows that we were supposed to repeat, we didn't know what he was saying. And in fact, they were so archaic that they didn't use them anymore, but he had found a book where they were still in, and he was using them. One of them was, "I plight thee my troth." And I didn't know what that meant in English, and then coming out of his Latvian mouth, we hadn't a clue what that meant for years. But we just kept all the rules in case that was one of them. And then later on, we found it printed somewhere, and kind of an explanation what it meant. That's what that was, he said. He was trying to say. So we got off to probably not too good a start, but it worked.
Did you have a honeymoon?
We did in Pick City, one night. If you know anything about Pick City, you know it was very, very plain. Because the next morning we had to be back, I had to be back to work. And last night we went out for a meal, and we spent more money on that meal than the both of us had together to our names back then when we got married, which was about $40. We didn't have it.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your wedding?
Well, that was about it. It was very simple. And then my parents built a house and they moved to town, and we took over the farm, and we didn't have any furniture. And I was so amazed my wife could take 2 apple crates, and they were made out of wood, put a board across the top, and curtains or something in front. And that was a dresser. And I was just amazed what she could do.
Can you tell me what your most stressful childhood experience was?
I think the time I broke my leg and all the time that took to get that healed, and that sticks out in my memory more than anything. Then later on, I had that appendix surgery, but that wasn't so bad.
Did they give you anesthesia for that
The
surgery?
Oh yes, yeah. Not for the setting of the leg though.
Right. What was your happiest childhood memory?
I guess when I got my Shetland pony. That was a big day. And my uncle had this Shetland pony for sale because my cousin was older than I was and he had outgrown him. He's just my size. So my dad said, you write to him. And there was no telephones. And you tell him that my dad would trade him a yearling steer for that Shetland pony. They wouldn't give him any money, but he would trade him the steer. And I did, and then I waited, and I think 2 weeks, 3 weeks went by, and finally I got a letter back from my uncle and said, it's a deal. So we took off. Now it was about 7 or 8 miles in the wintertime, and we got to where the roads were blocked, and we got the steer to where it was supposed to go, but I had to ride the pony most of the way home because we couldn't pull it. Couldn't make it through the snow. So, but I didn't mind.
Do you remember the pony's name?
Troxy.
Did you spell that?
Troxy. And my oldest daughter got to ride him yet. We had him that long.
How old were you when you got him?
I think I was 11. 10 or 11.
And what did Troxy look like?
I got a picture of him. Oh, he was the cutest horse there was. He was just a plain horse, but to me he was special. He was brown and nothing special as far as color was, but just a good pony.
All right. What was the most adventurous thing you did during your childhood?
Well, in those days there were no sale barns, livestock sale barns. So the cattle buyers would come out to the farms and they would buy the cattle. And some were honest and some weren't, and these homesteaders and farmers didn't always know what the cattle were worth. And so they got together and they ordered in rail cars. In a neighborhood, 1 or 2 people would go around and get this lined up. And okay, how many cattle do you have for sale? And you and you and you. They'd add it up. They'd figure out how many rail cars they needed, and then they would order them. And then a couple of days before, they would come around and assign you a shipping brand that you had to mark your cattle with because they were all mixed together. And then on the day, shipping day, the guy up at the end of the valley would turn his cattle out and bring them down. When they passed the second place, he would turn them out. And then some of us, I was one of them, got to stay home from school and take these in on horseback. We trailed them in. That was exciting. That was adventurous. And then we'd get them to town. And another thing, you had cattle mixed together from all herds, and the bulls would be fighting and things like that. But we can handle that. But one time we hit the edge of town, and our herd split, and half of them went right through town. I mean, kitty corner across gardens and fences and around people's houses and yards. Housewives were throwing brooms at us, and it wasn't good. And we had lost control of it for a while. And that was adventurous. That was exciting. And then when we got the cattle to the stockyards, of course, then the men stayed in town and watched the cattle and did whatever they did and got them ready for shipping the next day. And us kids, they took home. But that was a big day, shipping day.
All right. Are there any other childhood memories that you would like to share with us?
my friend and I were quite a bit younger than the other next level, and coyote hunting was a big thing in those days. And so one summer, all these older guys were going coyote hunting, and we wanted to go with them, and they wouldn't let us because we were too young. You got to stay home. So they piled into two pickups and they left. And my friend and I took our ponies, horses, and our single shot 22s, and we went in another direction. Well, the thing was, we got 10 of them that day. And we all met at the yard at the same time, and all the men hadn't even seen one. And our heads must have been swelled so big that I don't think our caps fit anymore, but that was a big day.
Could you sell the hides?
The county paid a bounty on them, and we got $5 for the old ones and $2.50 for the young ones. I think we got $27 for them, but that was a lot of money for kids, for us at the time. And they did it mostly, there were no predator control people at the time like there are now. So it was done mostly to keep them under control.
Right. Are there any other memories you'd like to share with us?
I guess not.
All right. Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
As I get older, I realize that when a lot of times I talk about something and the people who are, of course, younger than I am now don't know what I'm talking about. So I think for that reason it's important.
Right. Are there any other thoughts or observations you would like to share?
It's been a good run.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
You're welcome.